Deborah had popped to the shops to pick up some milk and bread, knowing that leaving her mum alone, for half an hour, wasn't ideal, but she didn't have any other choice. In the last few months, her mum had deteriorated and her mobility was much worse. Deborah blamed the lockdown on this as Glenda, her mum, before the pandemic, would go out most days. Since the lockdown, Glenda understandably stayed at home scared to catch the virus, resulting sadly in her mental and physical state. It was horrible to witness from her daughter's perspective. She opened the door and proceeded into the hallway with the bag of shopping. "Mother, I'm back. Sorry to leave you for so long, but the queue in the supermarket was horrendous. I only popped down for a couple of items." Very annoying indeed. Usually Glenda would call from the living room saying it was fine and if Deborah gets time, could she make her a nice cup of tea? There was only silence, which worried Deborah. She put the bag down, then hurried to the entrance to the living room. She pushed the door open and with shock, saw her mother on the floor only inches from the chair that she liked to sit on. Deborah rushed to her to see if she was okay. Glenda looked up at her. She looked in pain. "Are you okay, Mum?" she asked worried, noticing a bad cut on her leg. Blood ran from the gaping wound. Straight away, she ran to the phone and dialed 999. Jeff turned to his partner in crime, Jenny. "I'm absolutely knackered." Jenny laughed. "It comes with the job, I'm afraid. Has any more calls come through yet?" Jeff saw there hadn't been any and answered, "Not at the moment. I know the word unprecedented gets used a lot these days, but the amount of ambulance call-outs today is very unusual. Maybe we should take advantage of this and head somewhere to get a bite to eat." Jenny wiped her eyes. Only moments before, she'd been asleep, as the shifts were long. "Sounds good," she said with a smile. Within seconds, a voice was heard on the radio saying a car accident had occurred 12 miles from them and any ambulances in the area needed to head there immediately. "Sorry, Jenny. Food later, I'm afraid." Jenny sighed. "As I said earlier, comes with the job. Let's hope the accident isn't too bad. It'd be nice to go through a day where no one died." "Amen to that," he answered. The woman on the other end of the line had told Deborah an ambulance would be with her as soon as possible and, in the meantime, to put pressure on the wound to stop the blood. She found it very unnerving, as she'd never experienced anything like this before. Her mother fell in and out of consciousness, which worried Deborah. Not knowing really of what to do, she used a clean tea towel to cover the wound and pressed firmly on it, hoping it would help. "Please, Mum, stay with me. An ambulance will be here shortly," she said, scared. Glenda half opened her eyes and peered up at her. "I don't know what's happening. I feel so sleepy." Deborah felt helpless. "I love you, Mum, you know that, don't you?" Glenda then said, "Of course I know that, sweetheart. I love you too." Yet again, her eyes closed. Deborah shook her slightly and the frail woman opened them. Please hurry, Deborah thought. Since ringing for the ambulance, it had now been 75 minutes. Where were they? The accident was a lot worse than first thought. 3 cars and a van had collided on the bypass, resulting in 2 deaths and 3 people badly injured. The fire crew had also been called because another person in his 70s was trapped in his vehicle. 2 other ambulances had arrived in the last 5 minutes. Jeff and Jenny had arrived 20 minutes earlier, and had seen to a woman in her 20s who was now in their ambulance with head and arm injuries. Jenny done her best to calm the woman down, as she was very upset. Once they'd done everything they could, it was time to leave. Let's go, Jeff said, starting the engine. I knew this day was going to get worse, Jenny answered sadly, as the ambulance headed up the road for the 40-minute journey back to the hospital. It had now been 3 hours and still there was no ambulance. Where were they? Deborah didn't know what else to do, apart from keeping pressure on the wound and talking to her mum to keep her awake. In the last 2 minutes she was not responding and this worried Deborah immensely. The tea towel she'd used was now soaked in blood. What else could she do? Mum, wake up. Please wake up. I don't want to lose you quite yet, she said tearfully. She felt for a pulse and there wasn't one. Her skin was cold and pale. Deborah shook her and realized this wasn't looking good. Jeff and Jenny waited patiently in the corridor of the huge hospital until the woman was safely in A&E, being examined by a doctor. It was time to go. They proceeded back to their vehicle and noticed a queue of 10 ambulances waiting outside in the Bay Area, all with patients inside. Jeff sighed. It's getting worse. For some of them patients, it could take hours to get seen. She answered, it's a broken system, mate. I got into this to help people and that's what keeps me going. Some of the things I see now aren't good at all. Even before bloody COVID hit, the NHS was struggling. Since that time it's barely limping along. Keep your chin up. That's all we can do at the moment. Jeff looked at her sadly and said, still a bloody joke though. Come on, let's go, people to save. Yes, mate. She stared at the towel inches from her mum's body, covered in dried blood. It was too much to take in. Where was the help when she needed it? How come no one had turned up? Deborah sobbed, feeling like she'd let her down. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Deborah was in a state of shock. She kissed her mum's forehead. I'll be back shortly, Mum. There's someone at the door. If you're cold, I could lay a blanket on you while I'm gone, she said. As expected, her mum didn't answer. Deborah used her hands to wipe the tears from her eyes. In a haze, she walked to the entrance of the house, not quite believing what was real or not anymore. She unlocked it, then opened the door to 2 paramedics. One was a man in his 40s and the other was a woman no older than 30. The man then said, I'm so sorry it took a little while to get here. The man on our radio said you called about 4 hours ago. It's been a very hectic day and all the ambulances have been busy. All we were told was, an elderly woman had had a fall. Is that correct? Deborah looked at him, not really knowing how to react. After a few seconds, she answered, I'm afraid it's too late. Mum passed away over an hour ago. Jeff couldn't believe what he'd just heard. I don't understand. They said an elderly woman had fallen, but her daughter was with her and there shouldn't be any complications, he said. He looked down at the ground, clearly upset. Jenny placed a hand on his shoulder. Look, Jeff. We'll go in and have a look. Is that okay with you, miss? Yes, that's fine, was all Deborah answered, still feeling numb after everything that had happened. She let them in and they headed to the living room. Deborah watched them as they checked her mum, when finally the female paramedic said, Jeff, she has a faint pulse, but she's lost a lot of blood. We need to get her to the ambulance, pronto. Jeff looked up at the woman, who stood by the dinner table, with a hand over her mouth, shocked by the news her mum was still alive, and said, relieved, we need to get her to the hospital now. Is that okay with you, miss? She started to cry. Yes, that's fine, she replied. Deborah sat by the bedside, holding her mum's hand. She'd been there since they'd arrived 5 hours earlier in the ambulance. Both the paramedics had wished her mum a full recovery before they'd left. At one point Deborah fell asleep, but awoke suddenly to see her mum looking at her with a slight smile. You're awake. Thank God for that. I thought I'd lost you earlier, she said. She sobbed because the emotions had become too much. There, my sweet angel. You've nothing to worry about now. Mum's going to be fine, Glenda answered, placing a hand gently on her daughter's shoulder. The end.